It began as a story the white society of the antebellum South would have found both absurd and obscene, a tale that started not with love, but with a wager. The man was a wealthy Louisiana sugar planter named Samuel T. S. Wood, a man of substance and standing in the mid-1800s. The woman was a black woman he enslaved named Marie Therese Coincoin, though history would come to know her almost exclusively by the name he gave her, Cora. She was not a young woman, nor did she fit the period's idealized mold of delicate white femininity. She was, by many accounts, a large woman who worked as his cook, a role that placed her in the intimate heart of his household but also firmly within the bounds of her servitude. The specifics of the bet have been lost to time, its details blurred by the gauze of legend and the stark, unyielding facts of the legal record that followed. Some versions suggest it was a drunken boast among fellow planters, a challenge born of arrogance and a belief in his absolute power over his own destiny and the lives of others. Others imply it was a more personal dare, a foolish promise made to prove a point about his own unconventional nature or perhaps simply to shock his peers. The crux of the wager was this: Samuel Wood declared he would marry his enslaved cook, Cora. To the elite, slave-owning class of the South, such an idea was unthinkable. It was a transgression against social order, racial hierarchy, and the very institution of slavery itself. Marriage between a white man and a black woman was not just frowned upon, it was illegal. The rigid caste system of the South, built upon a foundation of white supremacy, could not tolerate the legal and social recognition that marriage would confer upon a black woman. For a man of Wood's standing to even suggest it was to risk his reputation, his social standing, and his place within the power structure of his world. His peers would have laughed, dismissing it as the empty talk of a man in his cups. They took the bet, confident he would never go through with it, believing the force of societal pressure and law would ultimately prevail. But Samuel Wood, for reasons known only to him, did not back down. Perhaps he was a man of stubborn pride, unwilling to lose a bet no matter how foolish. Perhaps there was a genuine, if deeply complicated, affection for Cora that existed alongside the profound imbalance of their relationship. Or perhaps it was an act of pure defiance, a middle finger to the very society he belonged to. Whatever the motivation, he followed through on his word. Around 1850, he did the impossible. He married Marie Therese Coincoin, his enslaved cook. This was not a simple ceremony. Because the law forbade such a union, they had to travel to Cincinnati, Ohio, a free state where such a marriage was legally permissible. The very act of leaving the South to marry was a monumental step, a clear signal that Wood was serious and understood the legal and social ramifications. The marriage certificate, a simple piece of paper, became a revolutionary document. It transformed Cora, in the eyes of the law in Ohio and, more importantly, in the eyes of her husband, from a piece of property into a wife. The return to Louisiana as a legally wedded couple was the moment that truly shocked the South. The news spread through the plantations and parlors of the region like a wildfire. A wealthy, white planter had not only taken a black woman as his wife but had legally married her, flouting the laws of his own state and spitting in the face of centuries of racial tradition. The social scandal was immediate and absolute. Wood was ostracized. He became a pariah, a subject of whispered gossip and open condemnation. His former friends and colleagues shunned him. His business dealings likely suffered. He had committed the ultimate sin of legitimizing a relationship that the South insisted must only exist in the shadows, as illicit concubinage. For Cora, the marriage was a transaction of unimaginable complexity. She went from being a slave, with no rights and no control over her own body or life, to being the mistress of the plantation. She was now Mrs. Wood, a title that offered her a form of protection and status that was virtually unheard of for a black woman in the antebellum South. She was no longer subject to the whip, to sale, to the arbitrary cruelties of the system. She lived in the big house not as a servant, but as the wife of the owner. This shift in power dynamics within the household would have been dizzying and fraught with tension. The couple began to have children, a fact that further deepened the scandal. These children were not enslaved mulatto children, the common and often unacknowledged offspring of white masters and black women. These children were the legitimate heirs of Samuel T. S. Wood. They bore his name. They were entitled to his inheritance. In a society where the one-drop rule of black ancestry classified a person as black and therefore suitable for enslavement, the existence of free, legally recognized, biracial heirs to a substantial fortune was a direct threat to the entire ideological framework of the South. Wood, fully aware of the precarious position of his wife and children, took extraordinary legal steps to secure their future. He could not change the racist laws of Louisiana, but he used the tools available to him. He petitioned the Louisiana legislature, not once but twice, for a special act that would grant his wife and children the legal rights of white citizens. This was an audacious move, asking the state to officially sanction his transgression. It is a testament to his wealth and perhaps his remaining political connections that the legislature even entertained his petition. The political battle was fierce. The very idea was anathema to many legislators who saw it as the thin end of the wedge that would destroy slavery and racial hierarchy. Yet, in 1858, against all odds, the Louisiana legislature passed Act 366. This extraordinary law declared that Cora Wood and her children, named Mary, Josephine, and Samuel T. S. Wood, Jr., were fully and completely invested with all the rights, privileges and immunities granted to free white citizens of Louisiana. It was an unprecedented legal victory. Cora and her children were, by a special act of law, made legally white for the purposes of citizenship. This legal triumph did not, however, mean social acceptance. The Woods remained isolated in their own community. They lived in a bubble of their own making, a family that defied categorization in a world built on rigid categories. Samuel Wood had traded his social standing for his family, and they lived with the consequences of that choice every day. They were a spectacle, a subject of endless fascination and disgust. The coming of the Civil War in 1861 only heightened their isolation. As the Confederacy fought to preserve the very system of slavery that Samuel Wood had so publicly rejected in his personal life, his position would have been untenable. While he owned slaves aside from his wife, his actions had marked him as a traitor to the Southern cause in the eyes of many. His legacy was a living, breathing repudiation of the core principles of the Confederacy. When the Union Army captured New Orleans in 1862, the Woods found themselves in a unique position. While other planters saw their world collapsing, Cora and her children, as legally recognized free citizens, were in a relatively secure position. Their status, hard-won from the state itself, was their protection. They watched as the institution that had once held Cora in bondage crumbled around them, while their own future, for the first time, seemed somewhat assured by law. The end of the war and the era of Reconstruction brought a new and different set of challenges. The emancipation of 4 million enslaved people did not erase the deep-seated racism of the South. The Woods, with their mixed-race family and their controversial history, were still a target. However, they now had their wealth and their legal standing. Samuel T. S. Wood died in 1871, leaving his entire estate to his wife, Cora. Cora, the formerly enslaved cook, was now a wealthy, propertied widow. She had survived the bet, the scandal, the war, and the death of her husband. She managed the estate and ensured that her children received their inheritance, solidifying their place as free, wealthy black individuals in a society that was increasingly hostile to black advancement as Reconstruction waned. She had navigated an impossible path from slavery to wealth and legal protection, all because of a bet that a stubborn man refused to lose. The story did not end with her death. Her children, particularly her son Samuel T. S. Wood, Jr., inherited not just wealth but also a name that carried both privilege and notoriety. They became part of a small, elite class of Creoles of color in Louisiana, often marrying within other wealthy mixed-race families. The legacy of Samuel Wood's fateful wager was a lineage that persisted, a family whose very existence was a testament to a bizarre and shocking chapter of Southern history. The tale of Samuel Wood and Cora is not a simple love story. It is stained by the original sin of slavery and the immense power imbalance from which it sprang. Cora's agency is largely absent from the historical record. Her true feelings about the man who owned her, married her, and ultimately secured her freedom lost to time. Was it a survival strategy of the highest order? Was there genuine affection? We cannot know. What we do know is that the story, with its beginning in a foolish bet, unfolded in a way that truly did shock the South. It challenged the most deeply held conventions of race and class. It demonstrated the bizarre and often contradictory nature of a society that could, on one hand, legally create a fiction of whiteness for a specific family while, on the other hand, systematically oppress an entire race. The marriage and its aftermath exposed the fragility of the South's social construct, proving that even the most rigid hierarchies could be broken, if only for a moment, by a combination of stubbornness, wealth, and a willingness to defy the world. It remains a powerful, unsettling, and uniquely American saga, a footnote in history that speaks volumes about the complexities of race, power, and identity in a nation perpetually struggling with its own contradictions.